Australia is an island nation, birthed from the sea and forged in the heat of heavy industry. But along our rugged coastlines, from the sun-bleached shores of Western Australia to the fog-drenched cliffs of Victoria, there are places where the rhythmic clanging of hammers hasn't stopped, even though the workers are long dead. These are the shipyards, massive skeletons of rusted iron and hand-carved sandstone, where the veil between the world of the living and the echoes of the past is dangerously thin. Here, the great southern land hides its darkest secrets, secrets of convict brutality, industrial accidents, and the restless spirits of sailors who never made it home. In this journey, we are stepping into the shadows of the 10 most haunted maritime precincts in the country. We will walk the hungry mile of New South Wales, explore the cursed wrecks of South Australia, and stand in the cold morgues of Tasmania. Turn down the lights, listen to the wind, and remember, when the tide goes out, it doesn't always take the ghosts with it. 1. Cockatoo Island Shipyard, Sydney, New South Wales. In the middle of Sydney Harbour lies a place of jagged sandstone and rusted iron. Long before the first tourist arrived, Cockatoo Island was a site of brutal industry. Established in 1839 as a penal establishment for re-offending convicts, these men were forced into back-breaking labour, carving massive grain silos and the island's first dry dock, the Fitzroy Dock, directly out of the bedrock. By the 20th century, it had transformed into Australia's premier naval shipyard, a place of constant hammering, sparks, and sweat where modern warships were born. As the industrial noise faded after the shipyard's closure in 1991, a different sound took its place, the silence of the past. Today, the island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it is better known to locals as a ghost island. The heavy machinery is gone, but the energy of thousands of men who suffered, bled, and died in industrial accidents or under the convict lash remains anchored to the stone. Those who venture into the Dogleg Tunnel, a WTOT air raid shelter, report the most visceral encounters. Visitors frequently describe the sound of heavy boots echoing behind them on the concrete, only to find the tunnel empty when they turn around. In the old convict barracks, orbs of light are often caught on camera, and the smell of stale tobacco smoke drifts through rooms that have been sealed for decades. The most terrifying account involves the ghost of the silos, a shadow figure seen peering down from the grain pits, believed to be a convict who was trapped and died within the stone walls. Security guards have reported hearing the distinct sound of a hammer hitting an anvil in the middle of the night, originating from the abandoned workshops where no tools remain. 2. Garden Island Naval Base, Sydney, New South Wales. Garden Island is the bedrock of Australia's naval identity. In 1788, it served as a simple vegetable patch for the crew of the HMS Sirius. By the late 1800s, it had evolved into a massive naval depot. It was a place of strategic pride until the night of May 31, 1942, when the reality of World War II struck home. A Japanese midget submarine fired a torpedo intended for the USS Chicago, but it hit the converted ferry HMAS Kootabool instead, which was moored at the island. The blast killed 21 sailors instantly. Since that tragic night, Garden Island has been more than a base. It has been a memorial. While it remains a high-security naval facility, those who work the night shifts tell a different story. The island is riddled with tunnels and historic bunkers where the past doesn't just feel close, it feels alive. The most frequent sightings occur near the Kootabool Memorial. Sailors on watch have reported seeing young men in dated naval uniforms walking toward the site of the sinking, only to vanish near the water's edge. But it is the subterranean tunnels that hold the most dread. Sentries have reported the feeling of being watched by something unfriendly in the shadows of the old fuel storage tanks. One documented encounter involves a technician who, while working alone in the tunnel system, heard a voice clearly whisper a military rank and name into his ear. When he spun around, the air was freezing, and the corridor was empty. Others have heard the sound of frantic splashing and muffled cries for help coming from the harbour when the water is perfectly still. A chilling echo of the sailors who struggled in the dark, oil-slicked waters in 1942. 3. Williamstown Dockyards, Melbourne, Victoria. Williamstown was the original gateway to Melbourne, a thriving seaport of the 1840s filled with sailors, convicts, and shipbuilders. The dockyards were the heart of the colony's maritime power, but the town had a darker side. To manage the high death rate from shipwrecks and disease, the government built the Williamstown Morgue, a cold bluestone building right by the water. It was a place where John Does from the sea were laid out on stone slabs, waiting for an identity that often never came. Today, Williamstown is a picturesque suburb, but the dockyard precinct remains steeped in maritime lore. The old city is considered the most haunted pocket of Victoria. The ghosts here aren't just shadows. They are residues of a time when life was cheap and the sea was a graveyard. The old morgue is the epicenter of activity. Tour guides and skeptics alike have been physically touched or felt ice-cold hands on their necks while standing near the autopsy tables. One of the most famous spirits is that of a phantom surgeon, often seen in a long coat near the Time Ball Tower, looking out toward the bay as if waiting for a ship to arrive. Local legends also speak of King Bill, a spectral sailor who haunts the dockyard gates. He is described as a tall, imposing figure who disappears the moment a flashlight is shone on him. Perhaps most unsettling are the cries from the pier. Residents have long reported hearing the sound of a woman sobbing by the water near the shipyard, believed to be the spirit of a mother whose son was lost to the sea during the construction of the piers. 4. Port Arthur Dockyard, Tasmania. Port Arthur was the inescapable prison, a place designed to break the spirit of the most hardened convicts. The shipyard here was part of a grand social experiment, teaching prisoners a trade to rehabilitate them. From 1834 to 1848, the yard was a hive of activity, producing large vessels like the Lady Franklin. But the labor was grueling, the punishments were sadistic, and the sound of the overseer's whip was as constant as the sound of the waves. When the penal settlement closed in 1877, the buildings fell into ruin, but the energy of thousands of tortured souls stayed behind. Port Arthur is now widely regarded as one of the most haunted places on Earth. The shipyard area, once full of hope for reform, is now a site of profound unease. Documented sightings at the dockyard go back to the 1870s. Visitors often report the smell of freshly sawn timber and hot pitch, materials used in shipbuilding, wafting through the air where no wood has been cut for over a century. In the ruins of the Master Shipwright's house, people have seen a woman in a blue dress gazing out toward the Isle of the Dead, the nearby cemetery island. Most terrifying are the work gang encounters. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing a line of transparent men in grey convict clothing carrying heavy timber toward the slipway. When approached, the entire group vanishes into thin air. Psychics who visit the yard often complain of a crushing weight on their chests, an emotional residue of the despair felt by those who knew they would never leave the Tasman Peninsula alive. 5. Fremantle Shipyards, Fremantle, Western Australia. Fremantle is a city built on the edge of the Indian Ocean, and its shipyards have seen everything from 19th century whaling boats to modern racing yachts. Since its founding in 1829, it has been a place of arrivals and departures. However, its most famous resident isn't a building, but a ship associated with the yards, the SS Alkimos. After being salvaged and brought to Fremantle for repairs in the 1960s, the ship became known as the most cursed vessel in Australian history. The curse of the Alkimos spilled over into the Fremantle Maritime precinct. Even though the wreck now sits further up the coast, the stories of the men who worked on her in the Fremantle docks continue to haunt the area. The port itself is a patchwork of old stone buildings and hidden tunnels that connect the docks to the infamous Fremantle prison. Workers in the shipyard during the Alkimos stay reported hearing phantom footsteps on the steel decks and seeing a figure in an oilskin coat who would disappear into sealed compartments. Since then, the Lady in White has become a staple of Fremantle port lore. She is often seen near the South Mole Lighthouse, staring out at the shipyards. Some believe she is looking for a sailor who never returned. At the nearby Maritime Museum, which houses parts of old wrecks, staff have reported disembodied voices in the galleries and the feeling of being followed. One guard reported seeing a luminous green mist rise from a salvaged timber hull in the middle of the night. a phenomenon many believe is the spiritual energy of the sailors who went down with their ships, now trapped within the wood stored at the yards. 6. Walhalla Dockyard, Brisbane, Queensland. In the late 19th century, the banks of the Brisbane River were a chaotic landscape of timber mills, smelting works, and the South Brisbane Dry Dock. This was a place of iron and steam, where massive ships were hauled out of the muddy water for repairs. The labor was dangerous. Men worked in the oppressive Queensland heat, surrounded by heavy swinging chains and the constant threat of the river's unpredictable floods. It was a site of grit and industry that powered the growth of the Sunshine State. As the heavy industry moved downstream to the port of Brisbane, the old Maritime precinct transformed into a museum and a public space. However, the transition from industrial hub to tourist attraction didn't clear away the spirits. The precinct, specifically around the Kangaroo Point cliffs and the old dry docks, is now known for a lingering, heavy atmosphere that feels like a physical weight on your chest as the sun sets over the river. The most famous resident of the old dockyard is known as the Pink Lady. Many believe she is the spirit of a woman searching for her husband who perished in a shipyard accident in the early 1900s. She has been seen gliding across the deck of the HMS Diamantina, which is permanently docked in the old dry dock. Witnesses describe her as a misty, translucent figure who vanishes if you try to speak to her. Night security guards have also reported the sound of ghostly footsteps on the metal gangways when no one else is on the ship. Even more chilling are the reports from the pump house. Visitors have heard disembodied voices screaming orders over the sound of phantom machinery that hasn't run in decades. One visitor even captured a photo of a man in 1920s-style workers' overalls standing behind a modern-day gate. A man who simply wasn't there when the shutter clicked. 7. Port Adelaide Dockyards, South Australia. Port Adelaide is one of the oldest settlements in South Australia, and in its heyday, it was a rough-and-tumble maritime hub. Known for its limestone and lawlessness, the dockyards were surrounded by hotels, brothels, and dark alleys. Sailors from all over the world converged here, and many never left. The docks were the site of countless drownings, both accidental and intentional, as men fell from the slippery wooden piers into the dark, cold waters of the Port River. Today, the port is a mix of heritage buildings and modern development, but it remains the ghost capital of South Australia. The old bluestone warehouses and the stagnant river water seem to hold onto the echoes of the past. The area is so active that it is a primary destination for paranormal investigators who seek to communicate with the spirits of the old wharf. The haunting of Port Adelaide is often centered around the red light phenomenon. Night workers have reported seeing a floating red lantern moving along the docks, believed to be held by a phantom watchman who died during a storm in the 1800s. There is also the ghost of the lighthouse, a figure seen near the relocated Port Adelaide Lighthouse, who stares out at the water with an expression of pure grief. At the nearby Maritime Museum, a spirit child is said to play amongst the exhibits. Staff have often found small, wet footprints on the floor in the morning, leading from the entrance to the old ship models, despite the building being locked and alarmed. Most unsettling is the smell of the dead. A sudden, overpowering scent of rotting seaweed and old tobacco that fills the air in the dockyards, often preceding the sighting of a dark, shadowy figure that lunges toward the water before vanishing. 8. Garden Island Shipyard, Western Australia. Off the coast of Perth lies Garden Island, now home to Australia's largest naval base, HMAS Stirling. Long before the Navy arrived, the island was a site of isolation. It was used as a colonial garrison and later a holiday retreat, but its military history is what defines it. During World War II, it was a critical defensive post. The island is separated from the mainland by a causeway, making it a lonely, windswept place where the sound of the Indian Ocean is constant. Because the island is a high-security military zone, few civilians get to experience its mysteries. However, the sailors stationed there have their own legends. The isolation of the base, combined with the island's ancient indigenous history and colonial shipwrecks, has created a hotbed of paranormal activity that even the most disciplined naval officers find hard to explain. The most frequent reports involve a spectral sailor who wanders the perimeter of the shipyard. This figure is described as wearing a white naval uniform that looks decades out of date. He is often seen by sentries on the midnight watch, standing on the edge of the piers and looking out toward the horizon. When challenged, he simply turns and walks into the sea. There are also stories of the abandoned bunkers on the island, where light bulbs have been known to unscrew themselves from their sockets while technicians are working. Perhaps the most chilling encounter occurred in the 1990s, when a group of sailors reported hearing the sound of a large party, music, laughter, and clinking glasses, coming from a building that had been decommissioned and boarded up for years. When they broke the seal to investigate, the building was empty, silent, and covered in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust. 9. Darling Harbour Maritime Precinct, Sydney, New South Wales. Darling Harbour was once the industrial lungs of Sydney. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a gritty landscape of wool stores, railway yards, and shipyards. It was famously known as the Hungry Mile during the Great Depression, where desperate men would walk from wharf to wharf looking for a day's labor. It was a place of extreme poverty, gang activity, and brutal maritime accidents. The ground you walk on today was built over the blood and sweat of a 1,000-strong working class. In the 1980s, the area was revitalized into a glitzy tourist destination. But beneath the neon lights and the Ferris wheel, the old Darling Harbour still breathes. The Maritime Precinct, which houses historic vessels like the James Craig, acts as a magnet for the spirits of the old wharfies and the sailors who once called this harbour home. On the wooden decks of the restored sailing ships, the past is never far away. Volunteers on the James Craig have reported being pushed by invisible hands in the galley. One story involves a young boy seen sitting on the bowsprit of a docked vessel, wearing tattered clothes from the 1800s. He smiles at tourists before flickering out like a dying candle. In the basements of the old warehouses that now serve as restaurants, staff often refuse to go into the cold storage areas alone. They report hearing the sound of heavy crates being dragged across the floor above them, even when the building is empty. The most disturbing encounter is that of the tall man in the black hat, a shadow figure frequently seen near the Pyrmont Bridge. He is said to be a former Union leader who was murdered in the 1920s, and he is often blamed for the sudden, unexplained cold spots that travelers feel as they cross the bridge late at night. 10. The Shipwreck Coast Shipyards, Victoria. The Shipwreck Coast of Victoria is one of the most treacherous stretches of water in the world. Hundreds of ships have been claimed by the jagged limestone reefs here. Near Warrnambool, the shipyards and salvage stations were places of desperate hope and horrific tragedy. The most famous wreck is the Loch Ard in 1878, where only 2 people survived out of 54. The shipyards here weren't just for building, they were for the grim task of repairing what the ocean had tried to destroy, and for salvaging the remains of the dead. This coastline is now a place of pilgrimage for those fascinated by maritime history. The Flagstaff Hill Maritime Village in Warrnambool is a living museum, but it is also a place where the spirits of the drowned seem to congregate. The howling winds and the crashing surf create a natural soundtrack for the ghosts that haunt the cliffs and the old shipyard reconstructions. The Lady in the Mist is the most enduring legend of the Shipwreck Coast. She is believed to be Eva Carmichael, one of the survivors of the Loch Ard, or perhaps one of those who didn't make it. She has been seen walking the beaches near the old shipyard sites, her white dress soaked with seawater. Visitors to the lighthouse and the surrounding maritime village have reported hearing phantom bells ringing out at sea during heavy fog, the sound of a ship warning of a collision that happened over a century ago. Most terrifyingly, people exploring the Loch Ard Gorge have reported hearing the screams of the dying echoing off the limestone walls. At the museum, items recovered from the wrecks are said to be attached to their former owners. A specific set of china from a wrecked ship is known to rattle violently in its display case whenever a storm approaches, as if reacting to the very weather that sent it to the bottom of the ocean. 10 shipyards, hundreds of years of history, and countless souls still anchored to the shores of New South Wales, Queensland, and beyond. The rust may eventually consume the iron, and the sea may reclaim the stone, but the energy of those who suffered, labored, and perished in these places remains. It is etched into the very bedrock of our nation. Whether it's the sound of phantom boots in a Sydney tunnel or the sight of a weeping woman on a Victorian cliffside, these encounters remind us that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting for the sun to go down. Next time you find yourself walking along an old pier, or you hear the distant groan of a rusted crane in the wind, don't be so sure you're alone. The sea never truly gives up its dead, and these dockyards are their eternal home. If you have ever felt a cold hand on your shoulder at a maritime museum, or seen a shadow move where there should be none, we want to hear your story. But for now, keep one eye on the horizon and the other on the shadows behind you. Thanks for watching.